What are the greatest lines of Arabic poetry ever composed about love? Let's find out.
ومن ينفق الساعات في جمع ماله مخافة فقر فالذي فعل الفقر.
وإذا ظلمت فإن ظلمي باسل مر مذاقته كطعم العلقم.
ألم تعلمي أني إذا الضيف نابني وعز القرى أقري السديف المسرهدا.
Before we get started, I just want to say that different people can have different opinions about this subject. And this is my opinion about some of the most beautiful and moving lines of Arabic poetry. I must tell you a bit of a backstory behind these lines so you can understand these lines better and appreciate them more, inshallah. Our poet is Antara ibn Shaddad al-Abasi. And Antara was deeply in love with his cousin Abla, and he wanted to marry her. But there were two things stopping him. One was that he was born as a slave, and another reason was the color of his skin. He was a black man. And this meant that his uncle, the father of Abla, and his tribesmen did not see him as their equal, and they refused him when he wanted to marry Abla. So what does Antara do? Antara tries to gain standing in his tribe through his valor on the battlefield. He becomes their fiercest warrior. He surpasses everyone in terms of glory on the battlefield. Let's listen to some of his poetry where he talks about his courage in the battlefield. He says, يدعون عنتر والرماح كأنها أشتان بئر في لبان الأدهم. They call O Antar in the battlefield. And these spears, they resemble the well ropes. Well ropes meaning when you want to draw water from a well, you drop down a bucket or a container attached to the rope. So imagine these ropes falling into the well. And imagine there are multiple ropes like this. So he says the spears going into the breast of Adham. Adham is his black horse. So the spears are going into the chest of his horse, and they resemble these well ropes because there are so many spears. And he says كيف التقدم والرماه كأنها برق تلألأ في السحاب الأركم. How can I go forward when the spears resemble flashes of lightning in a stacked cloud? There are so many spears around him. كيف التقدم والسيوف كأنها غوغاء جراد في كثيب أهيم. How can I go forward while the swords were as though they were a flight of locusts in a sand dune? There were so many swords around him, and they resembled the locusts. And he says, ما زلت أرميهم بغرة وجهه ولبانه حتى تسربل بالدم. But I kept charging into the enemy. I kept pushing my horse into the enemy with its throat and its breast, meaning he advanced to the midst of the enemy. حتى تسربل بالدم, until its body became covered with blood, and it became as though it was wearing a shirt made out of blood. So this was Antara and his bravery on the battlefield. But he does all this, and then he says, وَلَقَدْ شَفَى نَفْسِي وَبْرَأَ سُقْمَهَا قِيلُ الْفَوَارِسِ وَيْكَ عَنْتَرُ أَقْدِمِ. It cured my soul and removed its sickness when the horsemen called out to him and said, O Antar, advance and attack. When his tribesmen called out to him and asked for his help, he says, that cured my sadness, that cured my sickness from how they used to treat him. But at the end of the day, everything Antara does is for one purpose, and that is to win over his love Abla and to become deserving of her in the eyes of her father and his tribesmen. So what are these lines that I have promised you? What are these beautiful lines expressing his love for Abla? In Arabic poetry, the poet usually remembers his lover when he is weeping over the ruins that remind him of her. or when he passes by her house. Usually it is in a state of comfort. And this is what makes these lines truly profound and unique. Because Antara does not remember Abla in a state of comfort. When does he remember her? He says, وَلَقَدْ ذَكَرْتُكِ وَالرِّمَاحُ نَوَاهِلٌ مِنِّي وَبِيضُ الْهِنْدِ تَقْطُرُ مِنْ دَمِي. I remembered you, O Abla, when the spears were drinking my blood. In the midst of the battlefield, I remembered you, O Abla, when the spears were drinking my blood, and the shining swords of Indian make were dripping with my blood. فوددت تقبيل السيوف لأنها لمعت كبارق ثغرك المتبسم. And what did I want to do? When I remembered you, I wanted to kiss those swords that were attacking me, because their glitter, their shining, reminded me of your front teeth when you smile. Subhanallah. So these are the beautiful lines with which he addresses Abla, and I think they are one of the most beautiful and noble expressions of love that you can find in Arabic poetry. If you have come across any other lines which are similar or more beautiful, I want to know. Please share them in the comments. If you want to know more about the mu'allaqat, I have another video which introduces all the mu'allaqat, the hanging odes, and gives you some beautiful examples from the poetry in these mu'allaqat. So make sure you watch that, and I will see you in the next episode. Ila liqa.